All right. Thank you, Patty, for that word. If you would turn in Hebrews chapter 11. I tell you, when I miss a week or so out of teaching, it seems like it's skipping so much and missing out on things. But I'm trying to go verse by verse here and try to get everything, squeeze everything out of here we can. But missing last week and then going to miss next week with Paul here preaching for us. So we'll get through Hebrews eventually. You just hang in there, right? Today we're going to look at some characters in chapter 11, starting in verse 32. Some folks that are of questionable character, some of them, but God still used them. And as a matter of fact, they're listed in the book of Hebrews right now as being faithful to God, very faithful. And when you read their stories, which I want you to go read their backstories later, not today while I'm talking to you, but most of it's found in Judges and in Samuel. The babies are coming out, going to the room. Anyway, so you'll find their backstories, and we'll talk about these guys and their backstories just briefly, but I won't go into depth about what happened with them, but I want you to go back this afternoon and read their stories. I'll give you the scripture on them later. Look in verse 32, starting in chapter 11 of Hebrews. It says this, "And what more shall I say? I do not have time to tell about Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, David, Samuel, and the prophets, who through faith conquered kingdoms, administered justice, and gained what was promised, who shut the mouths of lions, quenched the fury of the flames, and escaped the edge of the sword, whose weakness was turned to strength, and who became powerful in battle and routed foreign armies." We'll stop right there. I want to talk about these guys. This is a very powerful picture here in these verses of heroic faith. Every one of these people had some kind of heroic thing they did backed by faith. Everything they did backed by faith. They're outstanding leaders. They led them to feel that many of them felt undeserving and demonstrated a lot of humility. Some of them were not very humble. Accepted incredible responsibility for what God was calling them to do. They showed undying courage when they were put on the spot. And God seemed to put them on the spot at certain times in their life. And they trusted and depended entirely upon God and conquered against all odds, unbelievable odds. These guys did things that were just, in warfare, it would be impossible. In modern day warfare, you might say it would be impossible. Even in that day, it was impossible what they did, what they accomplished by the power of God through them. The first one we look at is found in Judges chapter 6. It's Gideon. Y'all know the story of Gideon, right? He's of the lesser tribe of Manasseh. And when God comes calling on him, the first thing he does is, "I'm of the least of the least. I'm a runt of the runts. What do you want me to do this? Why do you want me to go to battle?" Right? "Why are you calling me? Why don't you call somebody big and strong?" Right? You remember when Israel chose their first king? What did they choose? A big guy, wasn't it? Saul, right? Big guy. We need a big guy to be our king. Wrong choice. But they got a king, didn't they? Right? He didn't turn out very good for him, but he was big. He was big among the Hebrew people. But Gideon here, he's claiming he's a little guy. He's already grown when he's fully grown when God called him in Judges chapter 8 and in Judges chapter 6. What's happening is the Midianites are terrorizing Israel. Isn't that interesting? Nothing changes under the sun, does it? Israel's what? Being terrorized right now, aren't they? Right? So it's nothing new. These things that are happening. The Midianites have reigned 7 years of terrorist activity on Israel, and God is calling Gideon to say, put an army together and let's wipe them out. Let's do away with your enemy. It's time, right? God is calling as time, and this is the way it's going to happen. So if you know Gideon's story, you know he probably started out with 30,000 men, dropped it down to 10,000 men, and dropped it down to just 300. All right? 300 men finally made up Gideon's army and went against the Midianite army, which was I don't know how many thousands, but they were outnumbered at least 10 to 1, right? And they won the war. They won the battle. Why did they win that battle? Because Gideon believed what God had said, and the Spirit of the Lord came upon Gideon, and he led through Gideon to that army 300 men against thousands, and they waded off into battle and won the battle. Now, you see, what's happening here is God is not giving any chance to Gideon to say, we're great, right? What he's doing is making Gideon and Israel understand, I am fighting for you with 300 guys against thousands. Now, you're going to see it over and over in these verses right here with these characters that are leading these wars. They're leading with unmeasurable odds against them, because they're leading with an army that's insufficient to actually win the war. So that they can't brag and say, look how strong we are, right? And it's interesting, every time one of these comes up, Gideon's the first one we come up with here. Found all in the book of Judges there, Judges 7. And then he says the next person in line here is a guy named Barak. I had not studied about this guy. I didn't know about it. Judges chapter 4 through chapter 5 is all about him. God came to him to save Israel. Now, not from the Midianites. These are years later, and they've been 20 years oppressed by the Canaanites. You know what happened to them, why they kept getting in captivity? Because they kept worshiping their other gods. God said, worship me and me alone, Israel. I'm your God. But every time they get around the Midianites, they go worship their idols. When they got around the Canaanites, they go worship the Canaanite idols and start intermarrying with the Canaanite women. They did everything God told them not to do. So by that sin, God would lead them into captivity. He'd allow captivity to happen. It's 20 years they've been in captivity, or oppressed, if you will, by the Canaanites. And Barak, he calls Barak out of nowhere, if you will, to be the leader of Israel's army. He calls up a servant. And again, I don't know Barak's whole story here. All I know is he depended on Deborah, the prophetess that was leading Israel at the time, to give him the word from God of what to do. So he didn't go out there and say, you know what, I am a good fighter, I am strong, I can take you a bunch of Israelites and we can whip these guys in our own self. No, Barak is in this book in Hebrews 11 because by faith he believed what the prophetess Deborah was hearing from God to tell him to do. And as a matter of fact, he told her, he said, look, I'll do it if you'll go with me into battle. And that's unheard of, all right? He's getting a woman to go with him into battle. You go beside me in battle, I'll lead your army. He didn't want to go out there at all without the voice of God right there beside him, right? And she was the voice of God at that time as a prophet over Israel, prophetess over Israel. So Deborah goes and she said, okay, I'll do it. Now the Canaanites were huge. They had, Sisera was there, I think that's how you say his name, Sisera, had 900 chariots of iron and multiple foot soldiers. It was a big army. The Canaanite regime, if you will, was a big army. And so here's Barak with an army of maybe 10,000 attacking at least 900 chariots. Does that sound familiar? Sounds like Pharaoh, doesn't it, right? With all of his chariots and horses and stuff. But in this situation, Israel has to come into hand-to-hand combat. It's interesting when they come into the Promised Land that every fight they had to fight was hand-to-hand combat. When they're coming out of Egypt, what happens? God fights for them, doesn't he? They didn't have to lift a finger against Pharaoh. All they had to do was listen to God and move when he said move, didn't it? Who killed Pharaoh's army? God did with the water. Remember? They across the Red Sea. All the army comes in and God just wipes the whole thing out at one time. At one time. God fought the battles for them then. When they come into the Promised Land, which is where we are here in this situation, they have to now fight their enemy hand-to-hand combat. There's bloodshed. And God's ordaining it. God's putting it together. But they're in captivity most of the time, because they're following after false gods and sinning against God. So God allows those people to overrun them. Sisera had a great army. Barak believed God. He believed what Deborah was saying from God, and he attacked with only 10,000 soldiers and won an incredible victory. But here's the kicker. I don't know if Barak was the type of guy that liked to brag a lot about his accomplishments, but Sisera himself wasn't killed by Barak or the Israeli army. No, here's what happened in that situation. When you read that story in Judges, I believe it's in Judges 13 or Judges 4 and 5, yeah. Here's what happened. When Sisera saw his army getting whipped, he hightailed it and ran, left his men out there to die. And he ran back and he went into a place for rest. He was worn out. He went into a tent to rest of a woman named Jael, Jael. And she welcomed him in. Wife of I can't remember his name now, but right close by in a neighboring city. She welcomes him in. She knows who he is. You know how he died? Get this. He goes in, he lays in her tent, she covers him with a blanket, lets him go to sleep. He is knocked out cold because he is so tired. You know what she does? She takes a hammer and a tent peg, drives it through his head while he's sleeping. Go back and read. Don't take my word. Go back to Judges and read what happened, all right? She killed the greatest warrior of the Canaanite people with a tent peg and a hammer. God even allowed a woman to kill him so no man in Israel could brag about how bad they were, how tough they were, right? So God took all of that recognition away from Barak and humbled him by letting a woman kill the greatest warrior of the Canaanites. Isn't that crazy? Read the story. I read it and I just kind of laughed. Thought, yeah, that set him down in the right place, didn't it? Yeah. But there's another great example of somebody believing by faith, Barak, and taking 10,000 people and beating an army 10 times his size. God did it through him. Again, showing that God is doing this. Then we go to the next man, Samson. Everybody knows his story, right? Yeah, we probably do. Anyway, Samson, Judges 13 through 16. All this stuff is happening in Judges. Samson, the angel of the Lord came to the mother of Samson and said, and told her that she's to bear a son who's going to save Israel from, here's another group of people, the Philistines. Guess how long the Philistines have been ruling over Israel? 40 years. 40, again, they're in captivity. Why? They're worshiping the gods of the Philistines. If Israel would have just stayed loyal to God, they would have not had to go through any of this slavery and captivity they did. None of it, if they'd have remained loyal. And they're a picture of the church today. If we remain loyal to God, we don't get caught up in sin and captivity. Captivity by the enemy. And so Israel again, once again, 40 years the Philistines have been giving them whatever, and they're tired of it, and they cry out to God, rescue us, rescue us. So he sends Samson. Now Samson is born of his mom. He's born to lead them against the Philistine, but he has a Nazarite, not a Nazarene, but a Nazarite vow, which involves extreme discipline, self-denial, and control of the sinful nature. Sounds like what? Christianity, doesn't it? Supposed to, right? Control of the sinful nature. The Nazarite vow is symbolic to teach him he's to live lives of self-denial and dedication before the Lord. Did Samson do that? No, he did not, did he? He was strong. He had his long hair, his Nazarite vow. His strength obviously came from God, but there was a certain thing about him that if it was cut off, it was his hair, obviously, he would lose all of his strength and become like a normal man. Now, if you read Samson's story, he goes along, he's doing fine. He's killing Philistines by the thousands with a jawbone of a donkey. He's doing all kinds of miraculous things that God has allowed him to do with his supernatural strength, if you will, until he comes across a little lady named Delilah. I'm sure she was a cutie, right? And he comes across her and she's like, tell me the secret, tell me. And that idiot, I didn't mean to say it. That guy, for some strange reason, after he tells Delilah the first time and she ties him up, and she says, the Philistines are here, and he breaks loose from that. He said, well, if you tie me with brand new rope, I'll be a natural. She ties him up the second time, and he breaks free and kills a bunch of Philistines. You would think the guy would think, this girl ain't on my side. She's really not my partner here in this whole deal. And for some strange reason, somewhere along the way, he finally, after enough nagging from her about what his strength was, he gave up. He said, here's the deal, woman. If you take my hair off, I'm just like any other man. Whoops. Samson had a problem with the flesh. Samson had a problem with lust. Samson had a problem with women, bottom line, right? He had a problem with that, a big major problem, to the point he gave up his secret. He went to sleep again. She had somebody come and cut his hair off, and she said, the Philistines are on you. And he jumped up to do his thing again, and he couldn't. He was like a normal man. They took him. What's the first thing they do to him? Gouge his eyes out. Why? Because through the eyes comes the lust of the flesh, and everything through a man's eyes, right? Isn't that interesting? They gouge his eyes first thing rather than break a leg or an arm or make him weak. They take his eyes out. That's kind of strange, isn't it? He goes the rest of his life with his eyes out. You know the rest of the story. The Philistines held him captive. They put him on a grind mill, made him walk around pushing that big stone all the rest of his life. Well, he comes out, and his guide has got him, I don't know, maybe on a chain, whatever, leading him around. He takes him inside the Philistine temple. He knows he's in there, and he knows there's thousands of Philistine leaders in that temple at that time. And he tells his guide, his chain fellow, whatever, the leader, put me between the two pillars. Put me on those main pillars where I can get a hand on each one. And the guy does it, not realizing that his hair is now grown back out, right? And again, his hair is not his strength, it's God, obviously. But his hair's been grown back out. He's back in his rare form again, if you will. They put him on the pillars. He puts a hand on each one. What does he do? Pushes them out. The whole temple falls down. Thousands of Philistines are killed, but also Samson is. Gave his life for the cause of God against the Philistine. But God used that boy. He used that man with all of his faults. And we need to understand something. These people that I'm calling out here, they all have a problem. They all have faults, no matter who they are. They're just like who? Us. We may look at them, we put them up on a pedestal like King David and say, oh yeah, he's up here. Saul of Tarsus, yeah, Paul, he's way up here. No, he's just like us, folks. God just called them and used them for a special purpose, and they got put in the book, right? They got put in the book because of what God did with them. So we need to understand as we look at these guys, because the next one is really weird, what happened here. But Samson did his thing. He killed thousands of Philistines. He worked and did exactly what God wanted him to do, even though he had problems with the flesh, problems with lust, problems with the immorality, if you will, of his life. God still used him, and he's listed here as a man of faith because he had faith in God, and God, he knew that. He knew what God was all about. And Matthew Henry says, he said, true faith is acknowledged and accepted even when mingled with many failings. Hebrews is putting these people out here of like people of faith, but you can see the failings in their life. The next one we see here, a guy named Jephthah. Jephthah, let me tell you his story. Judges 11, all that chapter of Judges 11 is his story. He did something really outrageous, but we need to understand his backstory. He's born of Gilead as his daddy, and his mom is a prostitute. Obviously, Gilead had a one-nighter with her or whatever, and a baby was born. Gilead takes the boy into his own home. Gilead and his wife and all of their sons, they raise him up as their own, right? And then when he gets to a certain age, the brothers that are born to Gilead and his wife decide, you're out of here, dude. You're not getting any of our inheritance because your mother, you're the son of another mother is what they called him, basically. And said, you're out. And they kick him out of the family. And he goes, in his story, he goes and lives in the land of Todd, T-O-D. I'm not sure exactly where that was. I think it's around Ammon in that area. And he goes out there and he makes himself a name as being a marauder or a rebel, if you will, against the Ammonites. Again, God's calling this boy out to come back and fight the Ammonites now, who are ruling over Israel and causing all kinds of problems. Well, they're doing terrorist activities. Well, Jephthah goes out, he gathers a group of renegades with him, and they start doing raiding parties on Ammonites, just random hits, like a guerrilla warfare type of stuff. His name gets well recognized and well known as being a son of Gilead, but yet kicked out of the country. This is what happens. The people of Gilead, the elders, come over to him in the land of Todd, and they ask him, say, would you come back and lead our armies? We've heard about your reputation, you're a great leader. Would you come back and lead us? Now, Jephthah does a lot of bargaining here, even with God on one thing. Jephthah tells him, said, you kicked me out of my house, you kicked me out of the land, and now you want me to come back to you? And he's like, okay, I'll do it. But here's the deal. He starts bargaining. When I come back, if I take the Ammonites down, I'm going to be your leader. I'm now going to be your president or your governor of your area. Well, he wants some political pull, if you will. He wants some kind of power from the people to bow down to him, if you will, and follow what he says do. And they agree to it. Okay? That's the weird thing. They agree to it. Isn't it going to, that's interesting when I see this, because this guy is not a godly man. He's Israeli, but he's not following after God. He is following after the pagan ways of doing things. And they come and ask him because he's a great warrior, not a holy man, but a great warrior. And he says, yeah, I'll do it. I'm going to be your leader, though, if I win. Not only does he do that, they say yes, which tells me it's going to be easy, and I can bring it up to now, it's going to be easy for Israel to accept the Antichrist. If they can accept a guy like this and say, yeah, please be our leader. Please be our leader for a while, right? He's going to show marvelous things. But Jephthah, he takes their offer, gets them to sign it basically and swear it in front of God and everything. Then he makes a deal with God. Now, this is a guy that does a lot of dealing. He tells God, he says, look, if you'll give me the Ammonites, makes a bargain with him. If you give me the Ammonites, Lord, I'll give you the first thing that walks out of my door, my house, as a burnt offering sacrifice. There's where he messed up, right there. That's where he messed up, because I don't know what he thought was going to come out of the front door of his house, a goat, a lamb, or what, they had animals in there too. But what ends up happening when he comes home after defeating the Ammonites, and don't get this messed up that God gave him the Ammonites so he could sacrifice a human, all right? God, he abhors sacrifice of humans. He says it all through his word. Don't throw your children in the fire of Molech. He said, don't do that. It's a pagan thing. It's the way the men of paganism do. And this guy Jephthah, he is working off of his pagan mindset, even though he's in Israel. He's working off of that mindset when he vows to God, I give you the first thing that walks out of my door. Guess what walks out of his door? His daughter, with a tambourine in hand, singing his praises about whooping the Amorites, right? Ammonite. And he goes, and he rips his clothes. Oh, no, what have I done? He made a vow. Look, they took vows seriously back in that day like we should today. You don't make a vow to God about what you're going to do and then not do it. Amen? Don't do that. Just keep it to yourself. But he made an open vow to God of what he was going to do, and he said, I'll offer it as a burnt offering to you, a sacrifice to you. He had some ways out, but I don't know. There's two different stories about this guy, whether he actually killed his own daughter.
The world go round, that's the way to be happy. This much I've